Okay, so ready for a total mind trip. Imagine having Napoleon, Cleopatra, and Shakespeare at a tea party, like sipping Earl Grey and trying to figure out what in the world a smartphone is.
Oh, yeah. That's the whole premise of this fictional podcast episode that we're diving into today. It's called Napoleon, Cleopatra, and Shakespeare in the Modern World. It's from the series Time Traveling Tea Parties. And it just got me thinking, you know how these historical giants would even react to our 21st century lives?
Seriously, can you even picture Cleopatra trying to wrap her head around Instagram filters?
Oh, it's almost too perfect. She was like the original influencer before influencers were even like a thing.
What I find fascinating is how the episode uses their reactions to highlight things we just completely take for granted. Totally. Like right away, Napoleon is utterly convinced that because everyone's staring at their phones, a war has broken out.
Yeah.
It's hilarious, but also makes you think, right? Like, what would someone who's used to armies and empires make of the power of these tiny little devices?
Yeah, it really underscores how much the nature of power has like totally shifted. Napoleon commanded armies, but today influence often comes from words and images on a screen. Like it's a completely different battlefield.
And speaking of battles, Cleopatra picks up on this too. She even comments on how people can rule a whole nation without an army just through their phones. But then she drops this thought bomb like, if people can't even control their own lives with all this technology, how can they possibly be ruling the world?
Yeah,
That's a pretty sharp observation, don't you think?
absolutely. It makes you wonder about the true nature of power and control in our hyper-connected world. We have access to so much information, but does that actually translate to empowerment?
And then there's Shakespeare lamenting the state of language in the age of Twitter.
Mhm.
He's horrified by how much we abbreviate everything. And he even wonders if, like, our thoughts are getting shorter along with our words.
Oh, his concern about the impact of technology on language and thought is something so many people are grappling with today. Do you think our constant exposure to sound bites and instant messages is actually changing the way we think?
That's a great question. I mean, look at Napoleon. He's totally baffled by the idea of digital warfare.
Yeah.
Like trying to understand how you can strategize in just 280 characters. It's such a contrast to his world, where wars were fought on physical battlefields with huge armies and complex strategies.
And now we have cyber warfare, disinformation campaigns, and the battle for hearts and minds is playing out online. The weapons are different, but the goal is still the same: to influence and to control.
And then you have Cleopatra, ever the image-conscious queen, becoming totally obsessed with Instagram filters. She's fascinated by how easily they can change someone's appearance, even questioning if beauty even exists anymore or if it's all just become an illusion.
Oh, it's such a clever way to make us think about how social media shapes our perceptions of beauty and, honestly, reality itself. Do you ever feel like you're seeing a curated, filtered version of people online rather than like the real them?
Well, all the time. And that's exactly what Shakespeare calls out, saying that social media is just another masquerade where you don't even know if the faces are real or fake. He's basically asking, when does the illusion actually become reality?
Right. And how do we even know what's authentic anymore in a world where images can be so easily manipulated? It's a question that this episode really forces us to confront.
And, as much as they're confused by modern technology, they also have some really insightful observations about it. Like Cleopatra jokes that she could have been a huge Instagram influencer sharing her morning routine with Queen Cleopatra. But then she gets serious and wonders, would people actually be interested in her story or just the idea of her as this historical legend? It really makes you think about how we consume history and how much of it is just like romanticized narratives.
Totally. It's like, are we really interested in the real people and events or just the stories we create around them? And how much of our own online persona is a curated story rather than the messy, complex reality?
That's a great point. Okay, shifting gears a bit. Can we talk about Napoleon's reaction to democracy? He's utterly flabbergasted by the idea that people just choose their leaders without any battles involved. He even asks if people choose someone and are still unhappy, did they really make a choice?
It's a provocative question, right? It forces us to consider the limitations of democratic ideals. Do we actually have free choice within a system that has its own flaws and limitations?
And while he's confused by democracy, Napoleon is quick to recognize that even though wars aren't fought on traditional battlefields anymore, the power of ideas and information is even more crucial. He's essentially asking, who controls the narrative in a world where literally everyone has a voice?
And that's a question that we all need to be asking ourselves, especially in the age of social media and this constant bombardment of information. Where do we get our news? Who are we listening to? Whose voices are being amplified and whose are being silenced?
It's a bit overwhelming, to be honest. And then Shakespeare throws in this question. Are there even any heroes left in a world where everyone tells their own story? It's like he's suggesting that the very concept of heroism has become fragmented and individualized.
It really makes you think about how history is constructed and remembered. In a world of personal narratives and competing voices, how do we create a shared understanding of the past? And what does that mean for our sense of collective identity?
And Cleopatra adds another layer to this, asking if we truly exist before someone writes our history. It's like she's saying that the act of storytelling itself is what gives us meaning and makes us real.
Her point is fascinating because it highlights the power of narrative, not just to shape our understanding of the past, but also our sense of self. Who are we in the stories we tell about ourselves and the stories that others tell about us?
Okay, I have to bring up this hilarious moment at the end of the episode. So Shakespeare, being Shakespeare, offers to write Cleopatra's story, asking if she wants it to be a tragedy or a comedy. And her response...
Let me guess she wants a comedy.
Exactly. She says, "I've been famous enough for tragedies. Let's try a comedy. But please don't make me do TikTok dances." It's such a perfect way to end the episode, reminding us that even amidst all these serious philosophical questions, there's still room for humor and a bit of fun.
And it brings us back to the core idea of the episode. How would these historical figures react to the sometimes absurd aspects of modern life? It makes you wonder if they wouldn't find our world just as strange and confusing as we might find theirs. You know, it's funny how this fictional podcast, with its crazy premise, actually makes us question things we normally wouldn't even think about.
Yeah, it's like you're holding up a mirror to our own world. But the mirror is like a little warped. Just enough so we see things from a whole new angle.
And that's what makes this episode so effective, I think. It's not just about these historical figures reacting to the modern world. It's more about us looking at our own world through their eyes.
Yeah, it's like they're highlighting all the absurdities of modern life. All the stuff we've gotten so used to that we don't even notice it anymore.
Exactly. Like Napoleon's bafflement at the whole idea of people choosing their leaders without a single battle. It makes us ask ourselves, what does leadership even mean in a democratic society? Right. And is it really choice if the options are limited? Or like if the system itself is flawed? I mean, we take voting for granted, but this episode really makes you question the whole foundation of democracy.
And then there's Cleopatra's fascination with image and how easily it can be manipulated in the digital age, like a commentary on our obsession with appearances and how social media just fuels this constant need for validation.
And Shakespeare's lament over the shortening of language. It's a powerful reminder of how technology can shape our thoughts and communication. Are we losing the ability to express ourselves with nuance and complexity in this world of sound bites and emojis?
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of ties into a larger theme that runs throughout the episode, the tension between progress and loss. We've made incredible technological advancements, but have we sacrificed something along the way?
Like what? Maybe a sense of community, genuine connection, a deeper understanding of the world beyond just the screen.
Right. All those things that Napoleon, Cleopatra, and Shakespeare seem to be searching for in their own way throughout the episode.
Yeah. Their struggles become a reflection of our own anxieties and aspirations.
Speaking of their struggles, I was really struck by how each of them seems to be wrestling with a specific aspect of modern life that, challenges their whole worldview.
Oh, can you elaborate on that?
Well, for Napoleon, it's definitely the shift in power dynamics. He's used to a world where strength and military might were everything. And now he's in a world where influence is often wielded through words and images.
It's like a complete paradigm shift for him. And it makes you wonder how anyone can truly grasp the complexities of power in today's world.
And for Cleopatra, it's the blurring of reality and illusion. She's obsessed with beauty and image. But now she's confronted with a world where appearances can be so easily fabricated.
Yeah, her fascination with Instagram filters is the perfect example. It's both amusing and thought-provoking, because it raises all these questions about authenticity and self-perception in the age of social media.
Right, and for Shakespeare, it's the fragmentation of narrative and the erosion of shared meaning. He's a storyteller at heart, but he's in a world now where everyone has their own story to tell. So it makes it much harder to create a cohesive understanding of the world.
It's a poignant observation, especially in this age of social media echo chambers and personalized news feeds. How do we find common ground and shared meaning when we're constantly bombarded with these fragmented narratives?
It's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. But I think this episode does a brilliant job of presenting these complex ideas in a really engaging and accessible way.
Absolutely. The humor and the wit of the dialogue make it easy to follow along, but the underlying themes are so thought-provoking.
It's a reminder that even though these figures are from such vastly different times and cultures, they still grapple with these timeless human concerns that totally resonate with us today.
Exactly. Whether it's the search for meaning and purpose, the struggle for power and recognition, or the desire for connection and belonging, these are all universal themes that transcend any particular era.
And I think that's one of the most valuable things about exploring history and literature. It allows us to connect with the past in a way that illuminates the present and helps us understand ourselves better.
I couldn't agree more. By engaging with the ideas and experiences of those who came before us, we gain a much broader perspective on our own lives and the challenges we face.
And maybe even find inspiration and guidance from those who've navigated similar dilemmas throughout history.
Speaking of inspiration, one thing that really stood out to me was how each of these figures, despite their initial confusion and skepticism, ultimately embraces certain aspects of the modern world.
Oh, that's interesting. Can you give me an example?
Well, think about Napoleon's realization that while the battlefield has changed, the power of strategy and influence is just as crucial as ever.
You're right. He quickly grasps the importance of controlling the narrative in the digital age, which is something incredibly relevant to our lives today.
Exactly. And Cleopatra, despite her initial reservations about the superficiality of social media, seems to recognize its potential for empowerment and connection.
I love how she jokes about becoming an influencer. It shows that she's not afraid to adapt and evolve, even in a world so different from her own.
And Shakespeare, with his love of language and storytelling, seems to find a certain beauty and wonder in the sheer volume of narratives that exist in the digital age.
It's like he's recognizing the potential for new forms of storytelling and artistic expression that he could never have imagined in his own time.
Precisely. So while the episode highlights all the challenges of the modern world, it also kind of suggests that these challenges can be opportunities for growth and innovation.
That's a really optimistic takeaway.
Uh-huh.
It's like they're showing us that we can learn from the past, adapt to the present, and shape the future in a way that honors both tradition and progress.
Beautifully put. And I think that's what makes this episode so compelling. It's not just a critique of the modern world. It's a celebration of the human capacity for resilience, creativity, and adaptation.
It's like they're saying, yes, the world is messy and confusing, but we can still find beauty and meaning in it if we're just willing to look for it.
And that's a message that I think we can all take to heart.
Okay, so we've taken this crazy journey through time with Napoleon, Cleopatra, and Shakespeare. We've explored their reactions to the modern world and what those reactions tell us about ourselves.
Yeah, it's amazing how this fictional podcast, Time Traveling Tea Parties, sparked such a deep dive, into the nature of power, image, language, technology, and how each historical figure just seemed to embody a different side to those themes.
Totally. Napoleon grappling with the shift from physical to digital warfare.
Yeah.
It really highlighted how the battleground has shifted, but the whole fight for control is still the same. Made me think about all the ways we're constantly being influenced, bombarded with information.
Yeah, and Cleopatra's obsession with image and authenticity. And in a world of filters and curated online personas, it's something I think so many people can relate to. Are we even presenting our true selves? Or just the version we think other people want to see?
And Shakespeare's concerned about the shortening of language, questioning if our thoughts are actually shrinking along with our words. That's a sobering thought.
Mm-hmm.
It made me wonder if we're losing the ability to think deeply and express ourselves with nuance in a world of instant gratification and just sound bites.
Yeah, his observations really hit home for me. It's a reminder to be mindful of how we consume information and to seek out diverse perspectives, ones that challenge our own.
Definitely. And speaking of diverse perspectives, what I found fascinating was how this episode challenged our assumptions about progress. We tend to view history as a linear progression, right? With each era surpassing the one before it. But seeing these historical figures navigate our world made me question if we've really progressed in every way.
Exactly. Have we lost something valuable in our pursuit of technological advancement and instant connectivity? It seems like Napoleon, Cleopatra, and Shakespeare all yearned for a sense of community, genuine connection, and a deeper understanding of the world. Maybe something that isn't as readily available in our fast-paced digital age.
Right. It's like they're reminding us to slow down, look up from our screens, and connect with the world around us in a more meaningful way.
And to remember that the human experience with all its complexities and contradictions transcends time and technology. We're all still searching for meaning, purpose, and connection, just like they were.
So for all of our listeners out there who might be feeling overwhelmed by the constant influx of information and the pressures of modern life, what's one key takeaway you'd want them to remember from this deep dive?
I think it's this: embrace the wisdom of the past, question the assumptions of the present, and shape the future with intention. We have the power to learn from those who came before us, to adapt to this ever-changing world, and to create a future that is both innovative and humane.
Beautifully said. And remember, like Cleopatra said, let's try to make it a comedy, not a tragedy. Find the humor, the joy, and the connection, even amidst the chaos.
And until next time, keep those teacups ready for another deep dive into something amazing.